Now, in most advanced economies, the competition for highly coveted corporate jobs and performance-based rewards meant that workers were willing to put in extra hours and go the extra mile to impress their employers. And, well, it seems that the situation is now reversing. From work hours and employment benefits to office culture, workers are the ones calling the shots. Now, more and more employees are demanding more flexibility, better pay and greater work-life balance, while job seekers pick out companies that check their boxes. We zoom in on this trend and we ask what makes a good workplace today in the post-pandemic era. For this, we have joining us in studio today Sarah Park, Senior Manager and Career Lead of Globalization Partners. And we also have joining us virtually Professor Joseph Kim. He is also Director of Global Engagement at Hongkyungan University's Business School. A very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. And my first question to you, Sarah, it's lovely to see you in the studio. And well, over the course of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of trends, I suppose, workplace culture change in all parts of the world. And I want to focus on how workplace culture really has changed in countries around the world, but especially in those such as South Korea, where there's been this very strong top-down organizational culture.
Right, that's a good question. I think the pandemic has really forced a shift to remote working for most people in the entire world. We've seen that companies that were skeptical of the online remote style work have now seen that throughout COVID-19, it really has proved to be a viable model of work. And now that we're moving forward out of the pandemic, a lot of companies are actually implementing a fully remote or a hybrid work method, which means that employees will come into work for some days of the week and they'll be home for other times of the week. And that's really what employees want now in this more modern time. It's really important these days, especially with the global talent crunch, as following the Great Recession, the Great Resignation, and then now the quiet quitting. A lot of employees' values have changed as they're really valuing flexibility and that work-life balance. And actually, in last year's employee survey done by GP, we've seen that people and employees are really more likely to stay at companies that value their needs, and that is really remote work. That's very interesting because many companies are actually trying to recruit and keep and retain talent by using remote work and hybrid work as an incentive rather than employees getting maybe extra bonuses or those small salary increments as done before. And for companies that are adopting a remote first or a fully remote work arrangement, not only are they benefiting from saving on operational costs, because obviously that's a great benefit, they're also getting the option of hiring remotely by using a global employment platform such as GP that really gives them options all over the world. And they can hire within reasonable time zones to fill out those needs and those recruiting needs in their company. And in Korea specifically, we're seeing that with startups, they really have more of a flexible and open structure, which means that they're really geared more towards this remote and hybrid style of work. And even with those more traditional companies, they're also trying to implement these more hybrid styles of work. Even if maybe the implementation is a bit slower than the US or other countries in Europe, we still see that it's happening.
Right, sure. And talking about these South Korean corporate giants, Professor Kim, turning to you, Samsung Electronics, it's claimed the top spot in Forbes' World Best Employers for the third year, and this is a jump from 106th place in 2019 to first place in 2020. And well, when we normally think of Samsung, though, we typically think of very long hours and intense competition. So what's made it #1 employer in this Forbes survey?
I think Samsung actually has a lot of things going for them. One of them is, compared to other companies, they offer a lot of specialized training. So for example, here in Korea, they have their own team of English teachers who, when they send their employees abroad to train them, they also hire specialists. For example, I've worked with them in doing things like nonverbal communication training and storytelling. And so that's been really an asset for Samsung. Another big asset for Samsung has been their R&D, the research and development. So employees know that Samsung is going to move forward and to experiment. And for a lot of people in Gen X and millennials, it's kind of exciting that this is not just a company that's doing the same old things over and over again. And finally, I think Samsung has really done well adapting to different global markets and different global situations. So Samsung Korea is not the same as Samsung Germany or Samsung USA or Samsung England, in that they've been able to adapt to the local culture and to be able to offer things. So it's not just applying these Korean policies globally, but they've done very, very well in adapting to that kind of work environment. So I think those are some key issues for Samsung.
Sure, and Professor Kim, in this part of the world anyway, South Korea and Japan, these two countries, their work cultures have been rather notorious for being very intense and rather unproductive, really, with an emphasis on conformity to company culture. But over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, though, attitudes and expectations towards work has been changing, and new job seekers in particular, namely Gen Zs, they're not really inclined to conform. So do you think work culture in Korea has also been changing in recent years?
Yes, for sure. As Sarah had mentioned earlier, the pandemic has really changed what's required in terms of flexibility. So large conglomerates, as well as smaller companies, are giving not only remote options, but also embracing like a different starting time. So you might be able to work a few hours in the morning, a few in the afternoon. Maybe you can go to the gym, work in the evening. So some want to start later and some want to finish later. So that's an option that they gave. Another big thing actually in my area in communication is companies are changing how they communicate. So even traditional companies, for example, like Kakao, requires all of their employees to go by an English nickname. So using the Korean more hierarchical language structure, you would call someone by their title. It would be Director Kim or Vice President Lee. But instead of that, when you use English, a much more horizontal language, you end up being able to call them John or Jack, which allows a little bit more discussion. And although this isn't new, this is something I think that's been rolled out a lot more in recent years.
Right, I did notice that about the titles as well. Quite a trend going on there. And well, turning to you, Sarah, now every generation tends to have a stereotype, and now we're seeing a new cohort of workers, the Gen Zs, who have been entering companies for a couple of years now. And well, what kind of characteristics are typically associated with them, and how are managers and employers really having to accommodate to their demands?
Right, that's a good question. I think that Gen Z is really directly influencing employers to tear back those decade-long policies that really no longer match with today's new generation. They're really liking the company culture that focuses on equality and that corporate social responsibility because they want to be in a company that aligns with their personal beliefs and values. And that means that Gen Z is really leading the great migration, and companies have to revamp those outdated policies in order to attract that talent. They also have to stave off boredom by providing learning opportunities and development for these Gen Z talent. As they are true digital natives, obviously this generation values interactive learning and really using technology to play a very instrumental role in how they learn and how they get trained at work. So companies can put together gamification and other video-based collaborative tools to really train and work with their new employees.
Right, I see. And Professor Kim, now Korea's IT giants like Naver and Kakao, they seem to be experimenting with very different ways to work, such as through the metaverse instead of commuting physically. Now, what are some trends that have stood out to you?
Very much, I think at the top of the list is flexible work. So for example, Kakao allows a 4-day work week every other week, and they can choose to work remotely. Or companies like Naver, they allow not only fully remote work, you can choose that, or you can go to the office a few days a week. Or you can even have shared company offices at various vacation spots, like in Jeju, or off the eastern coast of Korea, where they can go at a time. And even traditional companies like Hyundai, during the pandemic, about half of them were working remotely, but now, even continuing now, about over 30% of the company is still working remotely. Another trend is that places, foreign companies like LinkedIn or Google offer companies the option, offer employees the option to work remotely, but to come in whenever they want. So again, flexible work has really been sort of the trend that's been going on, not only in time, but in terms of like how they work, allowing people to communicate with you in different ways. So I think that that's been a major trend here.
Right, and perhaps there's been more flexibility in terms of how companies hire as well. And Sarah, I want to ask you about this. So Korean companies, the large companies anyway, and medium-sized companies, they tend to pick their employees in 2 huge batches every year. Right. We call them like 상반기 and 하반기 in Korea, right? But do you see this kind of recruitment trend changing as well?
Right, well, work is no longer a place we go. It really can be done anywhere. And the surge for remote work and the digital nomad lifestyle have really influenced people in modern times. So we see that the contractor style of work is really picking up a lot of attention with the new gig economy. The reason why people really look for independent work is because they want more versatility, and they like the ability to work on a project basis and have a short project and move on to something new, or to have additional income when it's combined with a 9-to-5 job. And not only that, they also want the ability to work anywhere in the world along with remote work. Actually, in fact, according to the research results done by consulting firms like Deloitte and Gallup, 79% of full-time contractors said they feel happier than working at a regular traditional job. And 64% of millennials working traditional jobs said they'd like an extra job to earn extra money. So now that companies are increasingly considering hiring contractors, it gives companies opportunities to test new markets without making those hefty investments. And that being said, managing an international workforce is obviously not the easiest thing, but managing an international workforce of contractors is obviously very complex. So really, companies really need to consider ways to provide a positive work experience and flexibility to both contractors and employees.
Right, and speaking of flexibility, Sarah, workers, they're generally looking for more flexibility in their employment conditions, right? So that's perhaps in terms of working hours and the location, as you said. So I want to know how you're really advising these companies on adapting to these kind of demands.
Right. Well, I think establishing a remote force workforce is an ideal way to really build your global team, and it really helps companies reap these considerable benefits that you would not be able to get by having an in-house brick and mortar type of operation. So you really have these cost savings, reduced carbon footprint, and an improved employee satisfaction. So savings from office rent, utilities, supplies, equipment, office maintenance, and parking spaces can be huge. Along with that, because employees have greater flexibility on where and when they work, they have higher employee satisfaction, and they are able to give more to the company because they have more to give, with having that work and life balance, as we talked about, the Gen Z requiring that, and this new generation needing that as well. So as more companies are going global and building out their remote workforce, we see that all of their employees really need to feel included, even if they're behind a screen. So companies really need to consider the global aspect of when they're hiring and how they're working with their teams, how to really work with different cultures, and to make sure that everyone feels included, even if they're in different parts of the world.
I see. And well, now before we go, Professor, when we talk about these new sort of commute trends, these flexible work hours, it all sounds great, and it's very possible for big corporations, large IT businesses to actually be able to implement these. But here in South Korea, 99% of companies are small and medium businesses. And let's be honest, there's a huge gap in terms of work conditions and employment benefits. So in other advanced economies, though, SMEs, they do offer something of a good work-life balance, but here in Korea, many would say that's perhaps not the case. So what should be done fundamentally to really improve work conditions and satisfaction in South Korea's smaller companies?
So I think for SMEs, for smaller and medium-sized companies, they literally cannot compete on things like having food in the cafeteria, offering special programs, and also because of their smaller budgets, their training programs, so they can't compete in this area. But where they really can compete is they can focus on becoming a purpose-driven or a mission-driven organization. If you look at the research, the most recent list that RDI put out of the top 10 companies with the happiest employees in Korea, the top two answers were literally my work feels important and meaningful work as a top factor for why someone liked their job. And so this is what SMEs can do to attract people, to give their workers a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning in their work. And it's not just about profit, it's not just about growth, but that this company wants to do something in this world and they want to make an impact beyond. And as Sarah referred to the Great Resignation, we saw here in the, not here, but we saw in the United States that many young people are quitting jobs, and these jobs offer good salaries, good benefits, and it's because they're looking for something bigger than that. They're looking for mission, they're looking for purpose, a sense of why and the things that they do. So I think that that's something that a smaller company can really offer that would be difficult for a larger company to offer.
Right. Thank you very much for your time today. Sarah Park, Senior Manager of Global Service Transformation and Career Lead at Globalization Partners, and Joseph Kim, Assistant Professor and Director of Global Engagement at Songyungan University Business School. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to our viewers for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time in Korea time with more global insights on issues making headlines around the world. Thank you very much for watching.